Howell, and welcome to the next episode of the Backstory on Marketing and AI. And if you haven't already done so, please go to prorelevant.com and sign up for all of these episodes and podcasts. I am the author of the upcoming new book, The AI Marketing Machine, and you can find out more information on this at marketingmachine.prorelevant.com. Today I'm interviewing Peter Swimm of Toilville, and he's got a fascinating story on and where he's trying to help his clients out in terms of their use of AI and building it into the organization. But let me tell you a little bit first about Peter. He is an innovative force behind Toilville LLC. He's well known for his expertise in conversational AI, and he's collaborated with major players like Walmart and Rabobank, bringing deep insights on preparing businesses for AI-driven global strategies. Peter, welcome. So good to have you.
Well, thanks for having me on the show, Guy.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell us, how did you get involved in this? What's your backstory on AI and marketing?
Sure. I've been in tech for my entire adult life, and I've started getting into conversational AI, which is basically the process of turning human interactions into terminal commands for like 10 to 15 years now. I worked on a open source chatbot framework called BotKit. BotKit was a day one supporter of Slack API when the Slack API first came out. They're like, okay, Slack is cool. What can we do with it? And like chatbots was like their big push of like, okay, people are going to have little agents that talk to things and reboot the server and all that. And with that launching, it kind of exploded my purview from a simple developer tool to basically supporting every industry and every vertical known to man. You know, like I'd be talking to the DNC one day and the Grammys the next day and Walmart the day after. And they all had omniversal needs, but they had a universal problem, which was just people want to say their problem and then the solution comes out the end of the shoot, right? And that kind of led me on this journey where, for the past 10 years, I've been kind of seeing the desire and the implication and the, messing around and finding out of all these companies trying to like handle the huge scale of their communication needs through automations and then with AI. And for all my tenure of building these products for people, I would talk to clients that you mentioned, Rabobank and all them, and they're like, we wish we can have a person like you come in and just like tell everyone what to do and all that. I'm like, hey, I'm a person like me, so I decided to kind of reach out and do my consultancy. And I feel like, an ounce of prevention can save a lot of heartache down the road because people kind of jump into the forefront of building these things and they get like 6 months in line and things aren't improving and they're in a mess because they didn't have a clear strategy of what they're setting out to do and how to measure it and all that. And I think right now, like there's an intense pressure for people to AI size everything, and they may not understand what they're AI sizing, and they may not understand like what is an improvement and what's a detriment to their existing processes.
Yeah, and I think you're right. And there's the hype and everything that wow, if we could do this or if we could do that, and then you get into it and you go, well, we can't quite do all that.
Mm.
But to your point though, if you can always start small. You do a proof of concept and then build out from there. And that's kind of the typical kind of an IT way or even a project way to do anything. And so bring those expectations down to reality and then work back from there. So makes a lot
Yeah.
of sense. So now you put together a company called Toilville.
Mm.
Tell us about that and how you came up with the name.
Toyville has always been an idea bouncing around in my head of the social contract of being in work. I'm a creative in my off hours. I have a family, and I like to work hard at work, but also I like to leave it on my desk and close up the office at 5 o'clock. And I think like you don't hear a lot of this in the pivot to AI, especially from tech leaders and management, that like technology has the potential to improve the day-to-day life of the worker, right? To amplify their expertise and to like automate the things that are super annoying about their job and all that. Because they're not the ones who signed the checks. So we don't do a lot of marketing in that regard. But, so I think Toyville is just a way of like, I want to work smarter, not harder. I want to keep a high volume of output, and I want to have a good life in doing so. And I think that's kind of like the contract that the digital worker is kind of engaging in for these AI first companies.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. And one thing that is always interesting is the boss or the client when they realize that hey, you can do more, with fewer people, then they're always going to say, well, how can I get more out of this guy or this team
Right.
now that they're using AI? And so there's, hopefully at least there's a short-term respite for all of us. And then, but I always see that, that we're going to go back into the, trying to stuff 10 pounds of stuff into a 1 pound bag. I know I'm
Yeah.
guilty of that. If I find something that'll speed something up, then that just means I can do, more of something else. So,
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
that's just the marketing mindset. I don't know.
Well, I also think that's kind of like the byproduct of the entire economy driven by tech thinking that like not only it's not enough to be profitable, you got to be 10 times profitable of your investment and you got to be exponentially 10 times profitable for quarters to come. And it's just like things that grow uncontrollably is an organism, it's cancer, right? Like it's not like a in the history of capitalism, it's not like a historical way you've done a business historically. But in the past like 25 years, it's become the expectation that you're, oh yeah, we're going to have year to year 10x growth, and it's going to happen forever because there's infinite consumers and our product has infinite total market accessibility. And I think that's kind of like the gold lust with AI right now is like, oh, I can just turn lead into gold and uh, you know
You mean you can't?
no, you could turn lead into lead. You could make a nice little lead chair to sit in when you're like paying your AI bills.
And you can paint it gold at least with some
Yeah,
gold
yeah, yeah.
paint.
Right, right. Yeah, lead-based gold paint. And but like, yeah, and I think that's the kind of we're in the find about moment right now, right? Like, all these the tech giants have like found out that like, oh, people aren't going to pay 5x more for a person to answer the phone and do it 30% worse. Like, and there's like clear studies now. Like we have a lot of data to show that like putting AI at the top of decision making is a huge risk and unsustainable at scale. And putting it at the bottom and then being cautious about it has a lot of ROI. There's things that are effectively have been solved by this wave of AI, like the FAQ problem, right? And like the
Mm.
what are the office hours problem, and like when is my W-2 coming? Like all those like things that are like take up so much time in answering that are just like just read the website, and people don't read the website or whatever. And those are things that are solvable, but like when people get into like problems of like my plane ticket, I've missed my flight because and I'm on my way to my mother's funeral and I need to get expedited. I need to get to Dallas by 4 o'clock, and all those kind of like social dramas that we do as a business to handle people like is no good at that. Like
Yeah.
we should get that person to our best support person and our highest tier kindness person as possible, because that's what makes or breaks loyalty to your product, right? And I think people have kind of lost sight of that, and they're kind of like, oh man, I can 100% automate my contact center, like absolutely not, at your peril.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, and I think you're right. The simple stuff that is on the website that could be answered. Even if it's on the website, so many times, I'll be looking for something and I can't find it. And so what even like, I'm playing with a new app at the moment, and you ask the help, and whatever happens, you're not phrasing it the way that help is set up, and so I just go out to the web and say, hey, how do I do this on this
Mhm.
app? And the thing gives me the right answers. It's just
Yeah.
incredible how good it is. And but to your point though, too, is quite often, I know right away that I've got a complex answer that the simple person isn't going to be able to answer, or the chatbot isn't going to be able to answer because it's trying to structure some tree thing and can't yet get you down that path. And you just got to say representative, representative, representative.
Hmm.
Finally, you get somebody, and finally you can get to that answer. So I
Yeah.
like your example that you mentioned about the complex edited expedited change that needs to be done.
Right. Yeah. I mean, like I always like building things in my systems, just like the minute a person says lawyer, right? You need to get to a person, right? The minute someone says like I did a chat bot for a food chain and I built in a bunch of stuff like, yeah, if a person says any of these food related distress issues around like salmonella or food poisoning or whatever, get them to a person, like, and it's like, if you work in that domain, it's common sense. But for the people building AI tools, they don't have that domain expertise. So it's
Mm,
not common sense, right? So I think that's also a big hallmark of my consultancies. I really advocate strongly for domain experts to be involved in the transformation because they're the ones who are like, you know, Aunt Sally, who runs the contact center for 30 years, knows way more about banking than I can ever forget, right? And I could probably teach her about AI quicker than she could teach me about banking, right?
yeah.
And so that's kind of like my pitch to the workers, because your employees are going to dictate whether or not your things succeed, right? Because if it's like some kind of like try hard proposal, they're just gonna be like, yeah, okay, yeah, I'll do the minimum required to get it done, and then 18 months you'll be gone, and we'll go back to what I've been doing for 25 years,
Yeah.
because I know the system, and I know people like you come along every, it's like every 8 to 10 years, it seems like, they fail every time. I think because they've not invested their entire organization in the concept of
Mm.
the digitization. So,
Well, you bring up a point, and that was going to be one of my later questions, but we'll bring it up now. And that is, if in building these AI applications, you do need to have those people with domain expertise. And
mhm.
one of the challenges, though, is those senior folks with, 10 or 20 or 30 years of domain expertise, they're few and far between, but then it makes it, if the AI is going to take over a lot of the things that that person is doing, it's going to make it harder for somebody with no domain expertise to break in. And have you
Yeah.
thought about that at all? Any comments or?
Well, yeah, I mean, and they've shown this, like Microsoft has a research wing that kind of is at odds with their marketing wing, but the research wing did a study that showed that people who use Gen I on their day to days stop critical thinking as much. So, like the presence of the tools doesn't help them find the clever hacks that the 30-year veterans have, because and so that kind of begs the question of like, AI is good on the front lines, but if you deeply integrate it into your system, are you kind of shooting your future in the foot? I think that's a very
Mm,
valid concern to have, because when you interview a person for a job, you're talking to them about their experience and what they've done in the past, and you try to get a sense of like how they'll approach problems yet unmet. And AI cannot do anything with problems yet unmet. It's entirely a met problem solution proposition. So you'll never reach that one-to-one map of the world with AI, and it'll never get better than the world is today
mm,
without like someone hacking it, or reinforcement learning. And this goes for ethics and things like racial bias and social bias and all that. So like you definitely need to have, and it may be that, instead of 30 years of experience in the trenches, you have 30 years of experience going to like the company's version of West Point, where you're studying the theory and you're seeing the outcomes and you're learning that way. But there has to be some sort of way of the human brain evaluating processes and making the decisions of whether things improve or not, and be able to measure that to see if that actually worked. And I think, the 100% unattended system is the dream of entrepreneurs and CEOs around the world. But, they have the CEO of Microsoft talks to 25 of the smartest human beings on the planet every day in meetings, who give personal reports to them. And they think that's what agents are, and actually you're going to get the bottom 10% of humanity for most people, and the CEOs get the top 25 people in the world,
mm.
so I think there's going to be a, kind of a expertise divide in these systems if they become the only game in town for accessing expertise.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I liked your example, although I might want to push back on it, where you said, the AI reduces the level of critical thinking, and it
Mm,
doesn't, somebody that's got 20, 30 years, that's kind of like, got all the scars and has come up with everything, whereas the younger person that's, entering it in gets a fast answer and doesn't really critically think about what the real challenge is. I think you're right, but it did take that person 30 years to get that far.
mm,
And maybe some of the scars that the 30, year experienced person has, maybe those are then already answered in the chat conversation. But at some point, that person has to answer whatever the questions are, and at some point, the AI isn't going to get you there, and it
mm.
it may end up forcing them to do some critical thinking or reaching out in some other fashion. But And you may actually get to to get to learning that scar faster. I don't know. I'm a little bit torn on how that process is actually going to, unfold. Because I agree
What?
with you that, it is going to be faster just to, hey, let me ask AI. Oh, yeah, there we go, and then move on.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know. Any thoughts?
Well, and I think like that also raises a good point about the arbitration of AI decisions. Like, we see a lot in like dystopian sci-fi movies where a person's trying to do something and the answer is no. And can I talk to your manager? It's like no. The entire system's the manager and it's ruled this and that's a very kind of fascist kind of like view of the world. So like there's a famous slide from the 70s of an IBM press thing that says a computer can never be held accountable. Therefore, a computer must never be able to make decisions, right? And I think well, like a lot of like, and this goes from juniors to seniors up. There's people who bring that 30 years of experience to bear on the problem, where they like make things happen for the benefit of customers and the people in their system that may not be in line 100% with the vision of the company, but it's the right thing to do, right? Like, the person who's just like, oh man, you missed the flight for your grandmother's funeral. I'm going to pull my strings that I know and make it happen, even though that's not policy, because I feel for you and that's the right thing to do. I'm a human being and you're a human being. Let's make this happen, right? And I think like you make a really cogent point of like the risk of that is how far back that 30 years of experience before you enter the system goes of the autonomous thinking, right? Like if people, we got kids entering kindergarten now who have their whole life been dominated by ChatGPT, and are they going to be in 15, 20 years, are they going to be measurably different critical thinkers than kids of 20 years prior, and I think
Hmm.
that we're kind of like experimenting with live cattle right now of like figuring what these things are like. And you see a lot, I talk to a lot of my teacher friends who are kind of like struggling with this, like, yeah, this is clearly not something this person wrote, and they can't understand the thing that they claim to have wrote, and I have to fail them, and it's like, it is kind of like bewildering and sad problem
Yeah.
for people. Like, am I getting this person's authentic self, when I'm talking to them, or am I talking to like what they think is the work? So that thinking smarter, harder thing has a double-edged sword where people are kind of like using it to like get out of work and get out of like their critical thinking and all that. So
Well,
there's definitely concerns there.
yeah, no, I agree with you. The for education, the education is now, very different, or it has to, evolve to be something very different. It's kind of like before the calculator versus after the calculator. Those of us that grew up without a calculator, we had to learn the times tables and be able to, multiply and divide and then worse than that, we had to look up, the sine tables and the cosine tables and whatever. And then finally, we got that in a calculator, and then we didn't have to know that stuff anymore. But
Mm,
what ended up, I think, coming out of that was that we ended up learning how to define and specify the problem better, and
mm,
then put the boundaries and the box around the problem. And I think that is what applies now to what AI is able to do. Is what needs to be taught to the young folks is how to define the problem, and then make sure that each and every one of the little things that goes into that definition are clearly stated. And then of course there's iteration. You get an answer and you need to know that it's wrong, and then to iterate and get it right. And so, maybe the teaching and the education, to your example, needs to be about how to define that problem and how to iterate and know when you got a wrong answer.
mhm.
Because if you don't understand the answer, then that's not right either. The education system has to tell you how to get to make sure your answer is right and that you understand it. And then, of course, it's all of the problem definition that has to go around it.
Yeah. And, I feel like a part of my consultancy that gives me my competitive advantage is I am kind of like a cusp millennial. And I say this as an advantage because like I remember the day my computer lab got the internet, right? So there's a point before the internet and a point after the internet. I went to college for audio production and they taught us how to cut tape, and the year after I left, they brought in computers to do that. And so like my whole life has been this like, the bridge from the old guard to the new guard. And I think that's really a pertinent point. Like I laugh every time I'm using a computer program and it has a graphic of a piece of tape and a knob from the machine I learned to tune, and just like this is yeah, my ears hear it, but it's like, does it have to look like it? It's just we're in a very strange divide where it's just like, how do kids even know what, the icon for telephone is like a telephone you put on a handset, like, how do
With
kids
a
even know?
dial, with a
Yeah, with a
rotary
dial.
dial.
Yeah. And it's just like, what is the reference point for that when phones haven't looked like that for almost 30, 40 years now, so
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That is so true, and yet those words are still in our vocabulary. So, I need to dial somebody, or, hey, we need to cut this, and then we need to splice something in, and all of
yeah, yeah,
those things are terms that really relate to the before as opposed to the now.
right.
It's really kind of funny. So, tell us a little bit about some of the strategies and some global strategies that
Sure.
that you can talk about and go from there.
Yeah. We're developing this framework at Toyville that I call spell work. And that's basically just systemically mapping out what are the wishes that come to your big microphone in your organization, right? And so, like, I think a lot of companies, like, they broadly understand their mandate of what they have to do. And then there's the yada, 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 which people handle, right? Let's say we sell telephones, right? And so, like, oh yeah, people call us up and they'll want to order the telephone. And then you're like, well, do they need one for them or for their company or one for their family, or what are their needs? And that's where you kind of break down into like the minutia of your line of business. And so if you don't clearly understand that and you go automate it, there's going to be huge gaps in it, because AI is kind of the thing, like, it's kind of like a Twilight Zone wish, that if you don't specifically convey the wish properly, there'll be a twist that comes back to bite you, and it may not be pleasant. And all of a sudden, the chatbot you worked on for 2 years will be, saying, things about Germans were misunderstood in the 30s, and, all kinds of like uncomfortable things that you didn't account for, because all you're trying to do is make a pizza bot. And now your bot is like on CNN being showing supporting, racism and stuff around the world, and you're like in a huge nightmare. And so you'll just blame a hack or whatever and fire everyone and move on. But I think that is kind of like you got to know what you're going to build, where and when, and be very crisp about it. And so our framework is, and once you can ship one thing and know and do it well, then you can horizontally expand across your things. And some things may never be adequate, like, the sensitivity of handling someone in a personal crisis, like the flight example I gave earlier. And there'd be things that are just like, yeah, absolutely. Like, I worked for a contact center for a little bit, and they worked for a company that was so large that their healthcare was bigger than Medicare in 13 states.
Mm-hmm.
And so every year during W-2 time, they would blow up, right? Because everyone would come to get the W-2s, and they had only 200 people to handle those millions of employees. And they found out that the average call time was 2.5 minutes, and 1 minute and 30 of it was user verification. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
calling, and I'm proving that I'm Guy, and I live here, and this is who I am. And they were so intent on automating the whole thing that they didn't realize that if they automated that verification process, then you would cut the call time in half and double the capacity of the call center. And it was really hard discovery, like, and, they were like, oh yeah, well, she's got to be a very personable chatbot, and she's got to tell jokes. I'm like, well, let's back up, and can we just build like solve this automation of like verification problem, which is like, it's always a nightmare anyways to like go through a phone tree. So why don't we just, you're waiting in queue for a minute, why don't we just have a bot handle that while you're waiting for a person? And it was just such a revelation to them, because they're so intent on the end goal that they
Mm-hmm.
miss the low hanging fruit, And I think a lot of organizations have tons of low hanging fruit that are just like, yeah, like, there's no reason you should wait on the phone for 10 minutes to get office hours or business hours or a phone number, anything that's like you said, on the website. But also, it's like an accessibility thing. Like, not everyone can use a website, not everyone can use a phone, not everyone can like speak. So like having automations that like answer things in people's preferred modality, is also like an accessibility issue. So there's things that you could do that are like warm and fuzzy and win-wins, and get that out there and learn to cut your teeth on that. And then you can like, approach these like stronger, longer term problems of like, how do you automate insurance quote, which is like 142 steps. like so.
Yeah, yeah, no, that makes absolute sense. And that's kind of the 80-20 rule applied to whatever the business question is. And I really like your point because I was just yesterday going through something. One of our sites got hacked, and you call into the number that you're supposed to call into, and they go, okay, well, let me verify who you are. And then
Mhm.
you go, oh, well, I can't solve that, and let me pass you over to somebody else, and they got to re-verify you. I mean, just pass the token over, and so I really like your point that because that verification now is it's painful,
Yeah.
and I wish too. I mean, this two-factor authentication, as much as I like it because I know that my bank accounts are then that much more secure.
Mhm.
It is a pain when you have to go through that every time, and it's just you wish there was a way to kind of get around that.
And you can tell that people are not interested in solving those human problems because no one's made a chatbot to call a chatbot yet. No one's made like I have to wait and hold for 20 minutes to talk to my bank. Why can't I just tell Siri on my phone that I need to call the bank and have this done? And
Mm.
they'll arbitrate. And then when two people need to talk, it's like, hey, pick up the phone and you talk. Like, the fact that anyone has to wait in a queue when everyone holds a phone in their pocket 10 times
Yeah, yeah.
more powerful than put a man on the moon is silly, and so, I think there's a lot of like tunnel vision, of people like they're so obsessed with making all the money that they leave all the little bit of money on the table, so
Yeah, 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 absolutely, and that makes a lot of sense. Well, I could go on here forever. There's some really good stuff that you brought up, and some very interesting topics that really could need to be fleshed out. And I think over the next year or two, just applying that 80-20 rule, so to speak, to any of these problems is going to be able to easily improve our lives in a big way. Last question though, before we close. So, what advice would you give an up and coming new marketer that's trying to, I don't know, break into the marketing function
yeah.
coming out of school or wherever they're coming from?
I think right now it's a battle of chum, chum versus chum, and everyone's like, I get tons of AI marketing already, and I'm trying to get out to people, and I'm surrounded by AI marketing, and it's very hard to stick out because it's all kind of like a gray morass of like sameness. So I think like being a student of your genre is still very important, and I think like really understanding your customer and your market is super important, just as always been. What AI tooling for young people should be a way to match the output of like established organizations, but use your youthful nimbleness and the ingenuity and decision making to like match their output, but with good decisions and coaching information. And I think that's like a lot of working with like I find a lot of things, I've worked with Fortune 500s and Fortune 5s, and there's the Fortune 5 millions out there that are kind of like, don't know what to do and they need help. And there's plenty of like opportunities to learn from people there. And there's people like who've been in the industry for 30 years who are like winding down their careers that have a lot of stuff to give. So, really embrace those kind of situations and don't just kind of like, attach yourself to the hot thing and
Mm.
lose out on the, you know, advertising has existed for almost a century now in the modern form. And like, there's just tons of like expertise out there to like get into. And it's a two-way street. Like they need you to like, figure out the pulse. Like I have a relative who worked for, did Morris the Cat, in the 80s. That was her thing. And she retired when her kids went to college because in her mind, her competitive advantage was having teenagers sitting around a desk, and she was just like soak in the culture, right? And being able to like have access to culture and new ideas is essential for the lifespan of anyone's career. So while you're young, you have that finger on the pulse, and you should exploit it and be promiscuous with companies and get as much experience as you can while using technology to amplify your reach
Mm.
and use it to kind of like attain your dreams.
Yeah, yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So, well, thank you for that. Well, Peter, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And that's been, your a lot of the stuff you're talking about really, brings to fore where kind of the human side and the AI side can fit together. Where can folks reach out to you and find out more information about you and your company?
Sure. You can reach us on the web. We're at itstoilville.com. We hold office hours at least once a month. So you can come to the forum and just talk about your problems. We also do consulting and 1 hour consults. And I'd love to get on the phone and talk to you about your problems and see if we can find a way to help you out.
Yeah, fantastic. So it's the website is it's toilville, VILLE.com. It's
Yes,
toilville.com. Wonderful.
that's right.
Well, yeah, fantastic. Well, Peter, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And to the audience, please stay tuned for many other videos in this series of the backstory on marketing and AI. And if you'd like, please go to marketingmachine.prorelevant.com and download some valuable materials about my upcoming book, The AI Marketing Machine. Peter, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks for having me.